Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, which is all around Veeam Backup and Replication. My name's Danielle Chapman. I work in the marketing team at Bytes, and today I'm really pleased to be joined by David Hill and Sam Nichols from Veeam, and also Joe Hepburn from Bytes. I'm just going to pass over to Joe, who's going to go through the agenda and provide a little bit of an intro.
Thanks, Danielle. Hi guys, my name is Joe Hepburn. I'm a data management specialist here at Bytes. So I work as a sales specialist overlay in any areas that sit in the backup, disaster recovery, governance and analytics section of the business. So Bytes as a whole, we have a cloud and software first mentality for our customers, and we see Veeam as an absolute best of breed company to help you on that journey from a physical workload to virtual to cloud native. So with today's webinar, the agenda is going to look a little bit like this. So why you still need to back up in a cloud native world, how you can protect your AWS and Azure data, current and future integrations, what modern data protection looks like, and a little bit of a demo at the end of the Veeam platform, just to give you a view of the tool set. So with that, I will hand over to Sam.
Awesome, thanks so much for the intro, Danielle and Joe. Really excited to talk to you today. Big thanks for Bytes for having Veeam, as well as all of the attendees on the call. So, really what we want to talk to you today is around the AWS and Azure native backup, right? Veeam's purpose-built tool sets that are able to protect workloads, production workloads that you have running in AWS, Azure, or both, and then really how they integrate with the Veeam Backup and Replication solution to kind of give you this multi-cloud or hybrid cloud data protection solution, right? So whether you want to protect physical, virtual, or cloud workloads, you've just got that unified solution to be able to do that. Just want to build on a couple of things that Danielle and Joe were saying, is that we appreciate that all of these events are now virtual, and that can certainly get a little bit tiring. So David and I like to keep this as interactive as we possibly can, make it feel like as much of an in-person event as we possibly can. So, any questions, comments, concerns, requests that you might have, just throw them in the Q&A panel to the right-hand side of your screen. Dave and I will make sure that we get to those throughout the call. Don't just save them for the end. We really want you guys to be able to steer this conversation and make sure that Dave and I are giving you the information and demos that you want to see. And then as part of that, we've trying to make it interactive. We've also built in some polls, right? So we'll be asking a couple of questions throughout here. You're able to answer those questions. We'll show the results on the screen. And again, Dave and I will kind of steer the conversation based on the responses that you give. So without further ado, let's get started. And I really want to, initially kind of set the scene for why we have these cloud native backup tools. And the first one is around the changing landscape to be protected. Now, we annually release data protection research where we go out and interview not just Veeam customers, but non-Veeam customers as well, to really understand what their environments look like, what the challenges that they're facing, what they consider to be a modern data protection solution. And this shows kind of that changing landscape to be protected. So in the lime green bars, you can see kind of how people have their workloads distributed today across physical, virtual, and cloud-hosted VMs. And the teal or seafoam green, or whatever description of that color you want to use, shows what they expect that to look like in the next 2 years. So, no real surprises on this slide. Physical machines or utilization of physical servers on premises continues to decline. Our virtual machines on premises, likely vSphere or Hyper-V, remains relatively static over the next couple of years. And then we continue to see that acceleration in the rapid adoption of cloud-hosted VMs. And that's primarily with AWS and Azure leading the pack, but we certainly see some other platforms like Google Cloud Platform, IBM, and so on and so forth. Now, one of the common misconceptions out there is that as we transition our production workloads from on-premises data centers, whether that's physical or virtual, to these cloud-hosted virtual machines, we no longer need to protect that data because that falls to the cloud provider that we've opted. And it truly is a misconception. And to help understand that, as part of that same research, we went out and asked folks, regardless of what environment that you have, physical, virtual, cloud, what caused your IT outages? And I've got the top 9 reasons on the screen here, and they range from infrastructure and networking outages, application and OS software outages, cybersecurity events, accidental deletion, retention policy gaps, configuration errors, so on and so forth. And what's really important to understand is that of these 9 things, 8 of those can, will, and do still happen in public cloud infrastructure as a service. Right, the adoption of infrastructure as a service really only solves that one that I've kind of de-highlighted in the middle here, which is storage hardware outage, because we're utilizing their storage. AWS or Microsoft becomes responsible for the maintenance of that storage. They assume that responsibility, but everything else still is up to us. So this does a good job of explaining some of the reasons behind outage in the cloud and why we might need backup. And I work for a backup and recovery vendor, so of course I'm going to say that. But AWS and Microsoft say it themselves in their own shared responsibility models. I've got here an example of one of those. This is Microsoft's, where they kind of define different responsibilities across different infrastructures, right? So on the right-hand side, you've got on-premises, and then as we move over to the left, the varying degrees of infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. And really, like, the kind of key theme here is, as we go from something like on-premises to one of these varying degrees of as a service, we are transitioning some of the responsibility to Microsoft, but we never really transition all of the responsibility. So, on the right-hand side, on-prem, all of those boxes are highlighted. Go figure. I mean, we own everything. We're responsible for everything. Infrastructure as a service, we start to transition that responsibility of the physical hosts, the network, the data center to Microsoft, and then all the way over on the left, software as a service. They're going to take ownership of the OS, the applications, the networking controls, and some of the infrastructure and access management. But really, the key point here is that top line: information and data. Regardless of what you are doing in the cloud, it is still your data, and it is still your responsibility to protect it. And in a Microsoft world, we are able to kind of architect our deployments with varying degrees of resiliency to help avoid outage or some causes of data loss. So, whether that's single virtual machines, whether that might be availability sets, availability zones, or paired regions, regardless, depending on which of those we kind of choose to adopt in our architecture, we can get up to what is called the 5 nines of availability, right? Up to 99.999% of availability. So that's, again, great from an outage perspective, but it doesn't really solve the data loss challenges, right? Because the primary source of high availability here is kind of replication. So if something happens in that source data set, the destination data set, it's going to happen there too. So whether that is a deletion, a misconfiguration, some sort of cybersecurity breach, the data is going to be deleted and it's not going to be recoverable. So ultimately, we still need to back up that data that we have in Microsoft Azure. And the same really goes for AWS. They have their own shared responsibility model, and it's very, very similar in premises, right? AWS is responsible for security and protection of the cloud. So again, the compute, storage, database, networking, all of the AWS global infrastructure, the facilities, and the customer is responsible again for OS, network, firewall configurations, their platforms, applications, and again, their data, right? It is still their data, it is still their responsibility to protect it. And similar to Microsoft, if you start to use other abstracted services like Amazon RDS or Redshift, AWS will assume more responsibility, but not all of it. So again, you need to back up your data in the cloud. Dave and I will have a bit of a discussion around some examples that we've seen that are out there in the public domain that help paint that picture and some best practices to adopt. But Veeam has been long known for having the best, the number one, especially in Europe, virtualization backup platform in Veeam Backup and Replication. I'm sure a number of you on the call already use that. And we've recently released over the last 10 months or so some purpose-built solutions to protect workloads that run in AWS or Azure with native toolsets. And regardless of which solution it is, whether it's for AWS or Azure, the core premises behind the solution is the same, right? We wanted to deliver a toolset that is cloud native, that is built for the cloud, right? We don't want to just be taking an agent-based approach to protect machines in the cloud, because agents aren't very scalable like the cloud itself. They aren't aware of the environment that they're in. They can be very resource intensive, both from an infrastructure perspective as well as a personnel perspective. Now, Veeam has long been able to use agents to protect those cloud workloads, but again, we want that purpose-built tool set. So just like we went out and carved out that virtualization backup market without using agents, we want to do the same with cloud. Point number 2 is that it's got to be very cost effective, right? One of the key drivers behind organizations moving to the cloud is that it promises to be very, very cost effective. And that is absolutely true, provided that it is architected and utilized correctly. But that can get away from us very, very quickly, right? Because the cloud, we pay for what we use, right? Every ounce of compute, storage, networking is going to be billed to us at the end of every month. And if we don't do things right, it can be very, very expensive. It can get very, very expensive very, very quickly. It's got to be secure as well. The cloud is often misconceived or misperceived as being less secure than on premises. It's simply not the case. It just has a different set of best practices when it comes to security in the cloud. And we need a product that is going to be able to resonate and adhere to those cloud security best practices to ensure that our data is always safe and secure. And then finally, the one that is maybe a little bit more nebulous is around cloud mobility, right? And this is really when it comes down to data portability, the ability to move our workloads between different environments, right? Because these workloads aren't necessarily static. We saw that on that first slide as people were moving stuff from physical to virtual, virtual to cloud, maybe even from one cloud to another, right? Veeam wants to be able to deliver a solution that is as non-prescriptive as possible, right? It is your data. We don't want to tell you what to do with that data, where to put it. We want you to decide where to put that that's really best for your organization, and ultimately arm you with a tool set that is going to help you, protect that data at its source, move that data to where it might need to go based on your organization's changing strategy, and then protect it when it lands at its new destination. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of double click into each of these. Again, they're kind of non-specific to AWS or Azure. All of these principles are adhered to, and then we'll start to open it up to a poll and go into a demo and see this in action. So first off is the cloud native piece, right? So our first line of defense when it comes to data protection in the cloud are native snapshots, right? So those are Azure VM snapshots in Azure, that's EBS snapshots in AWS. And snapshots are a great first line of defense because they offer us a good short-term solution for incredibly low recovery point objectives, so we lose as little amount of data as possible. And they also offer very, very fast recovery time objectives. So when a data loss or an outage does occur, we're able to recover from that as quickly as we possibly can. And again, those snapshots are native to those platforms. You can go out and you can manually create those snapshots using each console if you like. But again, snapshots are a first line of defense in data protection. They aren't the full solution. And that's because snapshots ultimately represent a single point of failure. So they're not very reliable for an all-encompassing data protection strategy. What we want to do is be able to complement those snapshots with backups, because backups give us a consistent copy of that original data. It is independent of the original disk. And that way, if that data set, that disk is ever compromised in any way, we are still able to recover, unlike if that happened with a snapshot. So Veeam is able to, again, automate snapshots and automate backup. And automate is really key here as well. We want to wrap everything in automation, and we do so with policies. And this is important for a number of reasons, right? Number one is it means you can stop babysitting backups, right? You don't have to go in and manually create these snapshots, manage these snapshots. ultimately delete those snapshots. You can just set these policies, set it and forget it, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. So it's great from freeing up your time perspective, so you're not just solely focused on data protection, you can also work on other initiatives that drive the business forward. And it's also very important because of the elastic nature of the cloud, right? And what I mean by that is we likely have these workloads that are more transient than they were on premises, right? They are instantiated, they serve their purpose, and they're ultimately shut off. And that can represent a problem from a data protection administration perspective, because if the left hand isn't talking to the right hand, right, Mr. Person creating the workload or application doesn't tell Mr. Data Protection, I've created this new machine, I want you to go and back it up, you ultimately are exposed with those retention policy gaps, one of those leading drivers behind data loss in the cloud. Building proper policies and using automation means if Mr. Application guy creates his application and tags it properly, it's automatically going to be able to be pulled into a data protection policy and automatically be protected. So it helps alleviate, manual processes, it helps alleviate some of the increasing personnel costs, and it helps alleviate those retention policy gaps. Moving on to cost effectiveness, right? Everything that we do in the cloud must have cost taken into consideration. And again, our cloud native solutions follow that train of thought. So there's a number of ways that we do it. David will help visualize that in the demo, but the first one is our backup cost calculator. This is actually an industry first. And what this is essentially, as you're going through and creating these policies saying, I want to take a snapshot every so often, I want it to be living as a snapshot for maybe 7 days, and then I want that to be archived off onto other storage medium, it's going to tell you how much that is going to cost before you implement that policy. So it gives you that foresight, that proactive understanding of how much your data protection strategy is going to cost in the cloud. And again, that's great from avoiding unexpected expenses. We don't want to be surprised at the end of a month with a $1,000 bill to protect a 50 gigabyte machine because we maybe made a misconfiguration. But it also helps us align our service level objectives with budgets, right? So again, we can understand what the service level objective of that machine is, and we understand what our budget is. We compare the two together before we even start protecting the data and make sure that we fall within the remits of both. Number two is change block tracking. As data protection admins, I'm sure you know what that is, but we do support change block tracking in both clouds where that is available in specific regions. So instead of taking a full backup every time, we'll only back up the blocks that have changed since the last snapshot. And again, that's incredibly important from a compute perspective and from a storage perspective. We are minimizing those transactions to keep that bill as low as we possibly can. And then the final point is around backing up to object storage, right? So I mentioned those snapshots, those live on those managed disks in Azure or EBS volumes in AWS, and that can get pretty expensive pretty quickly, right? Especially if we are bound by some sort of regulatory compliance requirements. Maybe that's internally imposed or externally enforced, where maybe we have to keep data for 6 months, a year, maybe even 5 years. Keeping that on those as snapshots on those volumes gets ridiculously expensive very, very quickly. So that's another reason why we want to offload as a backup, right? From that data protection standpoint I was talking about earlier, but also from a cost standpoint. And that's because when we do these backups, they go into object storage. So that's Amazon S3 and AWS, that's Azure Blob in Microsoft Azure. And that's really important because object storage is less than half the cost of the volumes that the snapshots live on, right? So in AWS, the volumes that snapshots live on are 5 cents per gig per month. In S3, it starts at 2.3 cents per gig per month and gets lower based on your consumption. So we can literally cut the costs in half, if not more, by backing up onto object storage. We can achieve our long-term retention goals while keeping those costs low. Moving on to security, again, there's a certain set of cloud security best practices that we want to follow. And one of those is isolating your backup data from production. And the reason why we want to do that is because we don't want someone to have godlike access to everything, because if we have a malicious insider or someone that has breached maybe our production account, we don't want them to be able to delete the production data and the backup data. We want to kind of keep that backup data isolated, so should the worst happen in production, we've still got something to recover from. I feel like I've been going on for quite some time. David, why don't you chime in and give our audience a break from my voice and maybe talk about some examples that you've seen around security best practices?
Yeah, sure. I quite like listening to your voice, Sam. It means I'm not talking. So yeah, apologies if you can hear a lot of clattering in the background as well, and massive storms just blew in, so it's getting quite loud in my office. But from a security perspective, there's some interesting aspects to this when you look at the history of the public cloud. And when you look at how you actually protect your data in the public cloud, a lot of the considerations for the public cloud are the same as physical data centers, isolated environments, storing your data off-site, different regions, different media types as well. So we always talk about in the backup industry the 3-2-1 rule as a best practice, where you have 3 copies of your data across 2 media types with at least 1 off-site. That doesn't change in the public cloud, and when you're looking at how you can protect your environment, if you look at AWS as an example, AWS recommends you use different AWS accounts as security boundaries. Well, from a Veeam perspective, that's really important. You can have a dedicated backup account with different root access keys, different permissions, everything. So, and then when you look at like Microsoft Azure, for example, you have different resource groups, different subscriptions, again, different Active Directory permissions. So building out your environment, just because it's in the public cloud, doesn't mean to say you can just throw everything into one bucket and be like, oh, that's great, I'm safe, I'm protected. You need to take into consideration those architectural considerations as well around how you can do that. And there's some stories in the past, I'm not going to go into details, but anybody who's interested, there was a company called Code Spaces who had a similar situation. They backed up everything, and then someone managed to hack their root keys, and not only did they delete all the production data, they deleted all the backup data. So this company literally went out of business overnight, all because they contained all their backups in the same account. So consider these things when you're looking at implementing a backup solution for the public cloud as well. And don't just think, oh, well, as some people have said to me in the past, it's in the cloud, it's safe anyway. That's like saying it's in the data center, it's safe. Somebody somewhere will always find a way in. So you need to architect for those considerations.
Awesome, thanks, David. Speaking of someone always finding a way in, my daughter's made her way into my office, so I apologize if there's any background noise. We're kind of dealing with the best of stay at home, but yeah, apologize for that ahead of time. But that's
got a better voice than you.
She does. So, those are those first 3 components of these, excuse me, of these platforms, right? Or these solutions. So I kind of want to get into one of those polls right now where David's going to give you a demo of the solution that you choose and how each of those the kind of core tenets are applied to the product. Before I do that, I don't want to be leading the witness, but I will say that our latest release of Veeam Backup for AWS is available. So our AWS solution is a couple of months ahead of our Azure solution. So it's 1 version ahead. So, this is will give you a good idea as to maybe what's coming in Azure as a sneak peek, but we do include things like snapshot replication in AWS. We've got that change block tracking support that's actually already supported in Azure, as is the public RESTful API. And then we do have application consistency for Windows workloads in AWS as well. So, one of the key things that we want to do with our cloud native solutions is be on multiple releases every single year. So we will likely have 4 releases for AWS in the past 12 months. We're actually on release number 3 already, with number 4 coming later this year. So you can expect to see these major features coming much sooner. So I'm going to open it up to that poll right now and ask you guys some questions, right? So you should see a question pop up on the screen right now, which asks, what platform would you like us to demo today? Whether that is AWS or Azure. So we'll give it 30 seconds or so for you guys to fill your answer in there. 33% of you guys have voted so far, and 100% is on Azure, David's favorite. Give it 5 more seconds. 56% of you have voted. It's still 100% Azure. So even if the rest of you wanted AWS, you're not going to trump the Azure guys, I'm afraid. So I'm going to close this poll. I'll show you the results. 100% for Azure. So David, I'm going to pass the screen sharing over to you, and you can give us a demo. And David may switch between AWS and Azure just to kind of show you some of those new things, because what we've done, especially from a UI perspective, is really cool in AWS. But David, the floor is yours again.
Right, bear with me. Here we go. All right, can everyone see that? Yeah, looks like it. Perfect. Okay. So yes, as Sam mentioned, I may switch between the 2 products, and there's a genuine reason why. So before we start the demo, the way that Veeam works with their cloud products is every 3 months we release a new version of the products with new capabilities in there. Now, Veeam Backup for AWS launched in December 2019, and Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure launched in, I think it was March 2020. So Azure is a little bit behind AWS in capabilities, but all the capabilities that you see will be in both products, and they will be very consistent and very standardized. It's just from a release cadence, there's obviously a 3-month step between them. So when I talk about certain things, I'll switch to AWS just to show you some of the new capabilities. But if we start, one of the great things with the cloud products is how simple they are to deploy. So whether you're backing up AWS workloads or you're backing up Azure workloads, you simply go to the marketplace for that public cloud, whether it's the AWS marketplace or the Azure marketplace, and you simply search for Veeam. You find Veeam Backup for Azure, and you hit deploy, and you'll go through like a little configuration script. It'll ask you like what resource group, what networking subnets, that kind of thing you want it on, and then off you go. When it's deployed, you're presented with this getting started page, and you'll see there's like 4 steps basically. You want to add your Azure connection, you want to do some worker configurations, create some backup repositories, and create your first policy. Really simple. So from an account perspective, you add in your Azure subscription. We can see here you have the actual ability to either you can specify existing service accounts. Now, a lot of customers, they don't want a product to go and create the security principles themselves. So they'll actually go and create a service account themselves, give it the minimum permissions. We have the ability to also create that account natively, directly through your Azure service keys. Excuse me. And then once it's configured, you basically create some secrets and you have a connection to Microsoft Azure. The next step is creating some backup policies. So this is done through Azure Blob Storage. This is where you actually, instead of using snapshots, we convert those snapshots, break those backups down into blocks. And anyone who's familiar with Veeam Backup and Replication and our VBK file format, we essentially are creating what we call an OVBK, which is an object storage Veeam backup file. We go in and you can see here, you basically say, I want to leverage this storage account. Here's my Azure Blob container, and here's a folder I want to create it with. Really simple, really straightforward. The final thing you have to configure is what we call workers. So with the public cloud and the costs being at the forefront of everything that is considered when you're building out a cloud environment, the considerations around how you actually perform backup tasks are quite important. So we obviously deploy an appliance into Azure or AWS as the region. And we leverage very small worker VMs or instances to go and perform tasks in specific regions. So you can see here, I have this configuration for Central US. What I'm basically saying is, here is the configuration options for this worker. So you can see it's a standard A1 in Azure. Here's my networking settings, here's my subnet, and here's my security group that I want to use for this. Now, what these do is they spin up when we need to perform a backup task, and then they're destroyed as soon as that task's finished. Why is that important? Well, if you think about every time you move data across regions in the public cloud, you're charged for that. Every time you want to go and do any kind of restore task, if it's moving data across those regions, you get charged for that. By having workers spin up in those regions where we want to perform those tasks, that helps us significantly reduce those costs. So if you're doing backups of workloads in London and you want to go and store your data in an object storage repository in London, there's no data transfer costs between the two. So it's really simple, really easy from that perspective, and keeps the costs down. So once you've done that, you're presented with this dashboard, and it shows you here that how many instances you have, how many are protected, how many policies you have configured, and how many repositories. So if we look at our protected VMs, we can see I've got a few VMs here. It shows us our restore points, what VM types they are. And this is all managed through our backup policies. And the backup policy is how we actually configure essentially those backup jobs. Now I'm going to show you the backup policies in Veeam Backup for AWS because they're a bit more involved. And everything you see here will be coming to Microsoft Azure fairly soon. But if I edit this backup policy, I'm going to show you in Oregon that we have the ability to pick different AWS accounts, but we can specify our regions. So we can say what region do we want. We can see Oregon. We can add multiple regions, as many regions as we want in there. What resources we want to protect. So we can protect via instances. So we can say I'm only protecting one instance here, or we have the ability to do it with tags. If I show you this in Azure, you'll see some slight differences. If I look at the resources, we actually have the ability to add multiple subscriptions, multiple resource groups as well. So you can actually protect resource groups in Microsoft Azure based on this. So we could pick, like, I've got one called Backup. You see I have one called Restore as well. I think they're pretty obvious what I'm doing there. So we have those capabilities to leverage things to provide us with the automation that we want in these backup products. We also have the ability to do application aware snapshots. So using VSS, we can turn on application aware if we want to. So we can do, if we're running things like SQL and that kind of thing. And I apologize, my voice seems to be going. That's interesting. I have a lot of calls today. Once we have that configured, we also have the ability to do snapshot replication. So from a disaster recovery perspective, we can replicate across different regions as well. So we can say, I've got a backup in London. I want to go replicate this snapshot into a different subscription or different resource group in, say, like Central US, that kind of thing. And then we can replicate those snapshots. Then we come to what we call the scheduler, and we call this harmonized scheduling. So you'll see here we have the ability to pick the times that we want to do different things. So we can say, I want to do snapshots at 8 p.m. or 8 a.m. I want to do a replica at 9 a.m. and I want to do a backup. Now what you'll see is it turns snapshots on for each one of these times, because we actually take a snapshot and then convert that. So if we're doing different times, then we'll take multiple snapshots. So you could specify, if I clear all this, could say I want to do it all at 8, and we just leverage one snapshot for that. So depending on how we want to do it, we can pick and choose how we want to do our different times. We also have the ability to set our retention periods. So how many snapshots do we want to keep, how many replicas, and also how many restore points do we want to keep as well, which is very important from a backup perspective. We can break this down into daily, weekly, however we want. Now we come to one of my favorite features, is the cost estimation. So as Sam was saying, this is like an industry first. So you can see here that this is breaking this down into how much our snapshots are costing, how much our replications costing, how much the backups are costing. So how much is it costing to store this in object storage, and what our traffic and transaction costs are. Now I'm incurring some traffic and transaction costs because I'm actually replicating snapshots across regions. But we can see, considering this is my Unify controller for my home network, the costs are pretty insignificant. You know, I'm quite happy to pay $4.77 a month to have multiple copies of the controller that runs all my network in my house. So that's how we create our backup policies, and it's the same over in Microsoft Azure. We have a simplified scheduler over in Microsoft Azure. The harmonized scheduling will be coming soon. And also from a cost estimator, we can see it's not quite as pretty, but it gives us much information. So between the two platforms, you're going to see that they'll have the same exact feature sets. Once we have all that data protected, we're able to actually do restores. So we can go here, if we go to our protected data, we can go and do restores, and we can do in-place restores or out of place. So if we look at our restore modes, we can either restore to the original location and overwrite that existing virtual machine or instance, or we can restore to new locations, so new regions, new subscriptions, new resource groups, and so on. And then we can go and configure different network settings. But we also have the ability to do what we call file level recovery. So anyone who's familiar with Veeam Backup and Replication, who's seen the Veeam Explorers, where you can basically open like a browser window and go explore, like an Explorer window, sorry, and go browse through the directory structures of your backups. We can do the same in AWS and Azure. So what we get here is through file level recovery, we get just a very simple file level recovery browser that allows us to just mount that backup without having to perform a restore. And of course, I've picked Linux, so I'll never be able to find any files in here. But we can go in and you can just browse through and just say, right, okay, I want to go in, I want to go find this particular user, I want to go find some files, and I can go do a restore. I love Linux because it's just, there we are, there's one. And I can just go say I want to download that, and that will just literally download that file in a zip file to my local desktop. So it's real simple, real easy to use, and it brings the power of Veeam Backup to the AWS and Microsoft Azure public clouds. So with that, I'm going to hand that back over to Sam now, and we'll carry on with the presentation.
Awesome, thanks, David. It's that time. It's time for another poll, guys. So this one is kind of like more about what does your environment look like today. So, you know, what we really want to do is know where you're running production workloads today. Is it just on premises? Is it in AWS only? Is it in Azure only? Or is it a hybrid of one or more of those? We really want to kind of understand where you guys have all of your production workloads running today. We got 43% voted already, 57, 71. We'll give it a couple more seconds. 86%. I'm going to close the poll now and we'll share the results with you on screen. So we can see here that the majority of you guys have workloads running on premises only. So I trust you're using Veeam Backup and Replication to protect those virtual and physical workloads. Nobody has got anything running in AWS solely. 17% of you have workloads running in just Azure only, and a third of you guys have hybrid environments, right? So whether that's a mixture of on-prem and AWS, on-prem and Azure, or maybe all three of these, or maybe just AWS and Azure. Who knows? Who knows? You can write that in the Q&A panel if you want to be more specific. But really just wanted to highlight like the hybrid nature of people's environments. And that's going to kind of be really important to that cloud mobility piece that we were talking about earlier. But this is, I pulled this from a Forbes article, but it's around multi-cloud strategy. I kind of feel dirty when I say multi-cloud because it's one of those buzzwords, right? And you guys are all going to tar me with the marketing brush, but multi-cloud is sure, it's a buzzword, but it truly is kind of here and now, right? So you can see here that 93% of organizations as part of this survey have a multi-cloud strategy. They break that down a little bit further to show that 87% of folks have a hybrid cloud strategy, right? So the mixture of, an on-premises, private cloud data center, and one or more of the hyperscale public cloud vendors. And a small 6% have, multiple public clouds, right? True multi-cloud, the use of like AWS, Azure, Google. And, this is really important to understand. Not only from the piece that we were talking about earlier about data workloads being moved, but just the fact that we are responsible for protecting different platforms, different workloads distributed across these different platforms, and that can be a real pain because we ultimately have all of these different tools to protect and manage. And in the same data protection research that we were talking about earlier, we asked, what does modern data protection look like to you guys? And more than half of the answers were cloudy in nature, right? So disaster recovery via a cloud service was number one. Veeam has long been able to cover that with things like our Veeam Cloud and Service Provider partners, with Cloud Connect, and with our direct restore to Microsoft Azure and AWS, right? So just a couple of steps to take an on-prem workload and have that restored and up and running in one of those clouds. But then interestingly, 2 and 3, which are not far behind that DRAS piece, was the ability to move workloads from on-premises to the cloud, right? So that's a migration. A migration is really just like a planned disaster recovery event. And the ability to move workloads from one cloud to the other, e.g. from AWS to Azure or vice versa. And then also important is the ability to standardize protection of on-premises and IaaS SaaS policies, right? So really just unify into a single solution the ability to protect cloud, virtual, and physical workloads. And Veeam's certainly able to do that and really kind of brings that full circle with these new cloud native offerings, right? So we ultimately give you seamless data portability and the ability to back up, recover, and migrate any of your workloads to, from, and within any supported environment. And we primarily do that with that portable backup file format that David was talking about in his demo, right? So if you want to take something that's physical and migrate that to virtual, you can do it. Virtual to AWS, you can do that. AWS to Azure, you can do that, or any combination of all of those. Veeam empowers you to do that with Veeam Backup and Replication and these cloud native offerings. And that certainly is a technological capability, but it's also a licensing schema as well. So Veeam has the Veeam Universal License, which is it does what it says on the tin, right? It's a universal license. It's not specific to any product or solution within our platform. You can use it to license multiple products or solutions within that platform. So as you have workloads moving from, one platform to another, the license is just going to move with it. So that license doesn't become redundant and you have to go out and procure and spend more money to acquire a new license. It's just going to move with it. Right, so Veeam again is being as prescriptive or non-prescriptive as we possibly can by empowering you with the tool set and the licensing to do whatever you want with your data. There's no platform lock-in. There's no even lock-in to Veeam, because you can, with our extract utility, open up a VBK file if you stop becoming a Veeam customer. So again, we're all about no platform lock-in, being as least prescriptive as we possibly can, just empowering you with that tool set to do what you want with your data. And a big component with that is what we just released in Veeam Backup and Replication 10A just a few weeks ago, and our AWS plugin. So now you are able to do AWS native backup and recovery, just as David was showing you in that demo, right from Veeam Backup and Replication. So it truly is that single solution, that unified management, monitoring, and reporting console for all of your workloads, cloud, virtual, and physical. It expands on that cloud mobility story that we were just talking about. Again, just that single console to move workloads to and from different environments as you see fit. And ultimately, the ability to drive greater value from your Veeam Backup and Replication investment and your Veeam Universal License investment. So that is available for AWS now through Veeam Backup and Replication 10A and the AWS plugin. Again, you can download those for free if you're already a Veeam customer from your account with Veeam. And we'll be launching it for Azure very soon. So yeah, as a architecture pictorially, this really just shows you what you can do. You can back up on-prem to on-prem. You can back up AWS to AWS, Azure to Azure, or you can do to and from any of these environments. Kind of covered what's needed. 10A, Veeam Backup and Replication, the Veeam Backup for AWS is an appliance in AWS, which can be deployed from Veeam Backup and Replication, and that plugin just to make that capable of being done. So I'm going to pass you over to David now, and he's going to give you another demo of how this all works with Veeam Backup and Replication. And for those of you that are Azure users, again, this is another great sneak peek into what's coming with Veeam and Azure in the coming months.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. So as Sam was saying, with the native integration into Veeam Backup and Replication, this makes it, for existing Veeam Backup and Replication customers, this makes it very easy to manage all your infrastructure, whether it be on-prem or out in the cloud, through Veeam Backup and Replication. So I know in the poll, most people said they've either got workloads running on-prem, in Azure, or in a hybrid model. Well, I'm showing you the AWS integration, but very soon we'll be releasing the Azure integration as well. So what you see today with AWS will also work with Microsoft Azure. So here we are with Veeam Backup and Replication. This is version 10A. So you'll see very traditional. I've got like a VMware backup here where I've got some vSphere workloads. I've got some Linux agent workloads, and then I also have these AWS EC2 workloads. So the way that we get started with this is exactly the same way you would with any other managed infrastructure. So you go to your managed servers and you simply right click and say add server, and you'll see that we have our usual options, but we also have Veeam Backup for AWS now. When we click on that, we have the ability to connect to an existing client or deploy a new appliance. So if you're already a Veeam Backup for AWS customer, you deployed it through that marketplace as I was talking to you about in the previous demo, you can just connect directly to it. Or you can deploy a new appliance. It'll go through, it'll ask you what AWS account you want to use, what region, what data center, and then you have the options to pick like your networking. Do you want dynamic or elastic IPs, and so on. Once that appliance is deployed, it's simply just added in here. You are then presented with the ability to add backup repositories. So we can see here I've got some external repositories these are all S3 object storage. You'll also notice that there's an Azure one. I can still add manually my Azure backup repositories just by right-clicking and saying add here. So although we don't have this native integration, I can actually add in a Veeam Backup for AWS or a Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure external repository as well. Once we have that added, we'll see that these are all my backup policies that I have listed. So I can actually right-click and I can go and edit this if I want. So we'll get the same options. What we see is the status as well. So we can see down here what's happening, how much data is processed, whether it's successful or not. Once those backups are run, we can manage our snapshots. So this is a new option in Veeam Backup and Replication 10a. So all our snapshots in AWS are listed here as well. So there's my Unify controller that I was showing you in that previous demo. I can right click and I can just do a restore to EC2 and go through some wizards. What I can also do as well is if I go to my external repository, we can see that all my Azure and AWS backups are listed here. These are the backups that we have stored in object storage, whether that be S3 or whether that be Azure Blob. Now, if I right click on these, I can literally say I want to do like instant VM recovery to vSphere. So anyone who's seen that at VeeamON or anything like that, you can literally just stream that data directly from the object storage repository to a vSphere host, and within about 10 seconds have that workload up and running on a vSphere host. I have the ability to migrate it to different clouds. So this is obviously an EC2 backup, so I can just right click on this and say I want to go do a restore to Microsoft Azure if I want. So I can actually take that backup and go and restore it and convert it into an Azure VM. And it's the same with our Azure backups. I can right click on that and go restore that to EC2. So from that cloud mobility perspective, we have the capabilities to move and migrate between different platforms. I can go restore this to Hyper-V and Tanix, wherever I want to go and restore, I can do that with these backups. So it's very simple, very easy to manage. It's all integrated in Veeam Backup and Replication. So everything that you would expect when we look at our logs and everything like that are all listed. So back to you again, Sam.
Awesome, thanks, David. So that really kind of brings us to a close. So, I want to take the opportunity to answer some of the questions that have come in. So I'll pick out a few here in the 5 minutes that we have left. So, someone's asking around how can they get this? So there's a number of options. I will answer it from both the AWS and Azure perspective, but in true Veeam style, we have a free edition. This is much like Veeam's community edition for Veeam Backup and Replication. It's completely free. There are no time limitations. We just give you the ability to back up 10 AWS EC2 instances or 10 Microsoft Azure VMs free, right? No charge from a Veeam perspective. And that also includes basic email support. So that's available. If you're a Veeam Backup and Replication customer with Veeam Universal licenses, from the AWS side of things, you can just go and deploy that appliance, just as David showed, and directly use those Veeam Universal licenses to protect stuff in AWS. You will soon be able to do it just that easy with Microsoft Azure as well when we launch that plugin. But kind of as a stopgap in the interim, we do have the opportunity for you to just kind of convert your Veeam Universal licenses, some of those Veeam Universal licenses, however you need, temporarily to a specific bring your own license file for Azure and license it that way. And then in AWS, we can also leverage the AWS metering service as well, where you only pay for what you use. Very similar to how you do with AWS as well. It's just tagged onto your AWS bill at the end of every month. What about support for Azure SQL? This is always a question that we get. David, do you want to answer that one for us?
Yeah, sorry, I missed that one, Sam.
That's okay, man. It's the usual question. What about support for Azure SQL?
Ah, yes. Okay. So Azure SQL. Well, that's an interesting one. Microsoft don't offer any ability for any third-party vendor currently to back up Azure SQL. So they'll allow you to do it through them for 30 days, and that's it. So if you really want us to be able to back up Azure SQL, I would love it if you started bombarding Microsoft with requests for this capability, because while until they provide us with any external capabilities to integrate with their service, we can't do it. So it's kind of a rock and a hard place, really. We want to do it. Microsoft don't provide us the capabilities, and until they do, we won't be able to do it. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the other option is really just kind of a full data dump, right? Export it as a backpack file, but you start getting into databases of any size, that becomes incredibly difficult to do on any kind of routine basis. There's no transactional consistency for the database, so not really an ultimate option. And sometimes 30 days for Azure SQL just isn't enough, right? I would actually assume that in most cases it's not enough. So again, we would love Microsoft to open up those APIs so we can integrate with it. So we've got those requests coming in from our end and from a number of customers wanting it, for Veeam to cover it. So the more the merrier. Nick also asked, does it cover Cosmos DB as well, David?
So not today, no. So from an AWS perspective, we're going to be supporting RDS databases, so SQL, DynamoDB, all those kind of ones. Cosmos is not one that's supported at the moment.
We'll absolutely pass that on to product management. And for those that aren't familiar, we've got our Veeam forums, which are a great way to air your requests. They are constantly manned by Veeam product management, including Anton himself. So any requests there are kind of always built in and discussed. So that's always a good opportunity. Nick says, thank you, you're most welcome. That kind of puts us like right at time. So again, we really appreciate you joining us today. So thanks to all of the attendees. Thank you to Bytes for having myself and David. As they did mention, all of the session was recorded. So if you want to share it with a colleague or rewatch a specific part, you're most welcome to do so. I'll also make sure that they send these slides over as a PDF, because there's a number of slides after this one that kind of really nicely kind of demonstrate visually how this all works with the Veeam backup and replication piece. But again, a big thank you to everyone for joining. Hope you enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you on a webinar soon.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks, David. That was really good, and I hope everyone enjoyed it today. If you wouldn't mind just filling out the survey at the end, that would be amazing. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.